my first guest, all the way from the Netherlands, Rutger Bregman. Welcome, Rutger. We exercised the cuddle, eh?
Yeah, we did.
Rutger, I'm very humble and honored because you have been interviewed so many times, even by the big Trevor Noah. How was he?
Well, that was a pretty nerve-wracking experience.
Okay, I'll try to ignore that you were interviewed by Trevor Noah while I'm asking you questions. So I know it has been 4 years since one of your media appearances went worldwide viral. I think it was something like Texas.
Yeah, those were the 3 main points. For some reason, they haven't invited me back since.
Yeah,
but,
still, I have to ask, do you still stand by that statement today?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Yeah?
And I think the good news is actually that we have made some progress in the fight against tax evasion and tax avoidance. And you know, I'm actually pretty proud that, for example, the European Union is leading the way there with an agreement for a minimum tax for multinationals. I mean, it's not enough by far, but we are moving in the right direction, I believe.
Most people know you from your books like Humankind, A Hopeful Story, or Utopia for Realists. Let's do the test. How many of you have read one of his books?
Oh, wow.
Can you count? No, we won't do that. That's a lot of people.
Cool.
These days, we push the brake on AI. You have the war in Ukraine, wildfires, and heat records. Even today in Greece. Are you still an optimist today?
Well, I always describe myself as someone who believes in the power of hope. You know, for me, optimism always sounds a little bit complacent, right? These people who will tell you, don't worry, everything is going to be fine. And I don't think that's the right attitude to have today. But it is important to hope for a much better world. There's one statistician called Max Roser that I really like, and he always makes the point that the world is in a really bad state, but it is much better than it was, and it could be so much better. All of these 3 statements are true at the same time.
Can you learn to be hopeful?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah? How do you do that?
Well, educate yourself, that helps. Stop following the news, read books.
Yeah, I read the news, so...
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of my best friends are journalists, so I won't hold that against you. But I do think there's a fundamental problem with this product that we call the news, you know, that focuses on mostly what goes wrong, right? And it's a daily barrage of incidents, right? A wildfire here, a drought there, an accident there, etc., etc. And it's so important that we learn to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And that's not always optimistic or hopeful. Sometimes it's quite terrifying. I mean, climate change is happening every single day, every single minute, every single second. But there are some also really hopeful trends. I mean, just take the enormous decline of extreme poverty. If you ask people around the globe, the vast majority of people believe that poverty has increased in the last couple of decades, while in reality it has halved, it has plummeted since the 1980s. So that is a reason for hope.
Yeah, but most of the time media think that kind of news is boring, if I may say that.
Well, I don't think it's boring. That's just the job of I think, a good journalist to make the things that are really important interesting, instead of, you know, making the things that are interesting important.
Yeah. You came to the Love Tomorrow conference to talk about the necessity of a new worldview. Mm-hmm. What is that worldview and why is it so important?
So my last book is called Humankind, and the reason why I wanted to write it is that in the last couple of decades we've seen a massive shift in science. So many scientists from a variety of disciplines, anthropology, archaeology, sociology, psychology, you name it, have been moving towards what I would call a more hopeful view of human nature, of who we are as a species. So often we're told that humans are fundamentally selfish, fundamentally egotistical. This is the message that is, spread by novels. It's in a lot of Hollywood movies. If you watch a Hollywood disaster movie, for example, then you see people panicking, and it's basically a dog eats dog world that's being portrayed every time. And this is simply incorrect. So I thought that we needed a book that showed that there was this shift happening, because the problem with all these specialists is they know everything about their tiny little part of the picture, which is really, really important, but sometimes you need to zoom out, as I said earlier, and look at the bigger picture. And so that's what I try to do there, because this view of human nature is not just an interesting scientific fact, it is also, or could be, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because what we assume in each other is often what we get out of each other.
Yeah, and how do you see that worldview spread?
Well, I think it was already happening when I started, working on this book. And again, that was one of the reasons. There are so many people who were already starting organizations based on this more hopeful view of human nature. For example, my good friend Jos de Blok in the Netherlands, he's started this huge healthcare organization called Buurtzorg. And his view was that management is basically bullshit. So that, a lot of people just don't need a manager. You just need professionals in self-directed teams, in his case of nurses, who decide for themselves, how they want to organize their work, their whole week. And it's now the most successful healthcare company in the Netherlands, with 15,000 employees, that delivers higher quality healthcare at a cheaper cost. And they pay their employees higher salaries as well. So it's like win-win-win. Yeah. So a lot of people were already doing this. I'm just, late to the show and write a book about it.
Climate change is one of the defining challenges of our time. From a historical point of view, what can we learn from past instances of collective action, and how can this inform our approach to tackling climate change today?
So there are quite a few people today who've become really, really pessimistic. I mean, even some of my friends sometimes doubt whether they even should still have children, because, why would you want to bring up children in this terrible world, and maybe, they'll die anyway because of all these terrible things that are going to happen. And that really frustrates me, because I think it's really, really incorrect in many respects. So one thing that people often underestimate is just how bad the past was. I often like to say that in the past everything was worse. And what they always underestimate as well is human resilience. So I earlier referred to how people respond to crises, right? Say a disaster strikes. And the Hollywood movies want you to tell you that, we panic and people are selfish all the time. That's not really how they behave. We've got decades of research in what they call disaster science. And it turns out that in reality, crises tend to bring out the best in people. They tend to mobilize people.
Did you see that during the COVID pandemic?
Absolutely. I mean, you journalists were writing a lot about toilet paper at the time, and how we were all hoarding it. But actually, if we zoom out, a lot of people asked me that question at the time. Like, Rutger, what do you think? Has the pandemic brought out the worst in us or the best? And I always said, it's too early to say. I mean, you need proper research. And now we have it. So the latest World Happiness Report looked at a lot of polls and other forms of empirical research that have been done during the pandemic in many countries. And they reported a global surge in benevolence. That's their words, a global surge in benevolence during the pandemic. So again, crises tend to bring out the best in people. Sure, there were some people hoarding toilet paper, which is not good, should not do that. But we should not focus on these exceptions, right? You should focus on what the majority of people are doing and what's the actual rule here.
There's a book in it, I'm guessing, for you. Lately in Belgium, the Degrowth movement is making a lot of momentum. Do you know it? It's basically the idea to save the planet by shrinking the economy. Is degrowth a solution, in your opinion, to climate change? And does it qualify for you as a new narrative for the future?
So I find that a complicated question. There are a lot of things in degrowth that I like. So there is clearly an enormous amount of bullshit in our current economy. I mean, there are enormous amounts of bullshit jobs, jobs that shouldn't really exist. These people can go on strike and no one really cares. I mean, management consultants, bankers, corporate lawyers, and these even people saying it about their own jobs, right? It's not like people can say, oh, that's a historian on stage. That's the definition of bullshit. No. It doesn't work like that. It's people saying it about their own jobs. And surely we can get rid of that. If we look at, some of the modern consumerism, cars getting bigger, right? Short flights, people flying from Amsterdam to Brussels. I mean, obviously that's insane, and we should crack down on that and regulate it. And that's already happening, by the way. Again, I think the EU is leading the way. But as an overarching ideology, something that wants to give us the answer to everything, I think degrowth is sorely lacking, and it's really not what we need right now. We need enormous amount of new technologies, for example. There's just a lot of technologies that don't exist yet, or are just starting to be invented, that could really radically transform our world. And moreover, I just think that this is a problem in general among leftists and progressives these days. There's so much focus on what you shouldn't do, what you can't do, right? Don't say this, don't say that. Don't use a plastic straw. Don't have children. Don't fly. Don't eat meat. And in some cases, I mean, with don't eat meat, sure. I'm a vegan myself, so that's all really good. But this idea that the highest thing you can do is to not do certain things, it's just sad to me, right? If we think about the definition of a good life, we should think about the things that we want to do.
What do we want to do?
Yeah. So I think probably the most important moral question in your life is, what kind of work do you do, right? You've got 80,000 hours in a career. What are you working on?
Yeah, I read that. It was really sad. 80,000 hours.
Yeah.
So degrowth has a few good elements.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but not the whole idea is a good narrative.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the global perspective, I think we often underestimate just how rich we are. When we think about the rich, we usually like to look at those at the top, with their private jets. And yeah, sure, they're really, really rich. But if you earn a median wage in a country like the Netherlands or Belgium or France or Germany, you are already part of the richest 3.5% in the world. So we all remember the Occupy Wall Street movement, and they were great in many respects, and they always said, we are the 99%, but globally speaking, that's not really true. In many respects, we are the 1%. And when we think about degrowth, I mean, there are a lot of things that we really like. I mean, we like festivals like this, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, the world needs to become a lot richer, and you need a lot more, in that respect, standard growth if you want to have festivals like this everywhere.
In this session, Feed Your Head, we're looking for the psychology of change and the building blocks of a new story for humanity. If you'd like, what qualities should this new narrative meet, and how to engage all people and not just the happy few?
So as I said, it should be a hopeful narrative. It should be about the possibility of change, not the inevitability. It's about what we humans can achieve if we actually work together. And for me, it's also important to, well, as they say, check your privilege and realize just how privileged many of us are, and what we could actually do if we are willing to make a couple of sacrifices and make our own lives a little bit more difficult. So I obviously worked for quite a few years on this hopeful book, about humanity, and at some point I saw people sharing photos of them reading my book on, say, Bali, or on a really nice beach, with a caption like, "Oh, this is just fantastic! Reading this wonderful book. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry, people. Lovely holiday." And I was like, "Oh, I created a monster." So if Humankind is like a warm hug, then I thought maybe my next book should be like a cold shower. So it's going to be a little bit like a self-help book, but most self-help books teach you how to be more happy, more mindful, more relaxed. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we would have a self-help book that teaches you how to have a more difficult life, right? A book that you wish you didn't read, because now you actually have to do something. So that's the current project.
Can't wait. One of your essays, You Are Not As Good As You Are, reads as an indictment against the greatest waste of our time. You call it the waste of talent. Can you elaborate on this?
Sure, yeah. I already referred to it a little bit with the notion of bullshit jobs, which is, by the way, a concept of the great anthropologist David Graeber. And there are many examples of that. But I wanted to expand on it a little bit. So I created this sort of like a matrix, I think that's the right word.
Yeah, I
where
did a test.
There are basically two variables. There are two questions. How ambitious are you, and how idealistic are you? I mean, the people in the bullshit jobs or those who work for a tobacco industry or something like that, they're neither ambitious or idealistic. There are also people who are quite ambitious but not very idealistic, right? They have these great jobs at Goldman Sachs or as a corporate lawyer or blah, 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 or maybe they're a brilliant medical specialist, but if you really look at what they're contributing to the world, it's pretty underwhelming, right? Even if you're super smart, you know, heart surgeon, you're probably in a rich country, you know, you're mostly helping very rich patients late in their life, you know, maybe to extend their life by a couple of months or years. So I think that's another form of waste of talent. Then thirdly, you also have people who are quite idealistic, but not very ambitious. And that's, I think, what you see a lot among people in Gen Z, you know, who love all these slogans like, I don't know, think global, act locally, or small is beautiful, or they mainly focus on what you shouldn't do, you know, don't use the plastic straws. And I don't think that's just ambitious enough. I mean, the global problems are so vast. We can't just focus on, I don't know, creating a little bit more awareness, using the right words and pronouns and whatever. Sure, that's a good start, but there's just so much more to do than that. So the sweet spot that we got to try and find is to be both idealistic and ambitious. And that's what I call moral ambition.
Where are you on the matrix?
I'm trying to be morally ambitious, of course.
It's
up for other people to judge.
Rutger, if it's okay with you, I would also like to present you a couple of questions from the readers of De Morgen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a newspaper in Belgium. So
I know them very well.
You know it? You read it?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. So one of the readers...
If I can get behind the paywall. Yeah.
I will send you a link.
Okay, sure.
I have passwords for all the newspapers in Belgium. So one of the readers asks, you once stated that global warming should be on the front page of newspapers every day. This hot summer, we cannot ignore this issue. Other summers either, but doesn't it risk indifference? How do we prevent climate fatigue?
I'm not really all too worried about that, to be honest. I think there's been an enormous raise in awareness around the issue of climate change just in the past 5 years. It's sometimes easy to forget, but I mean, I don't consider myself particularly old. I recently turned 35, but I sometimes already feel quite old compared to, you know, younger generations. I recently visited my old student society in Utrecht, and I was just astounded by the generational difference.
Why?
So when I was a student, we never worried about, you know, flying around Europe with cheap Ryanair tickets. We just didn't have any discussions around that. No idea. We had 2 vegetarians at the time, and we were making fun of them all the time, and I was probably the worst bully. And if you would have told me back then that I would turn vegan, I would be horrified. So it's pretty fascinating to see how quickly this shift has happened. And if we now look at some of the technological progress, I'm not sure everyone realizes just how quickly things are developing. So with solar energy, for example, it's basically the cheapest form of energy. And it's going down, 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 way faster than many experts even predicted. So no, I don't feel that climate fatigue. I think we need more of it and more action, and there are many roles to play in this movement.
And you don't make fun anymore of people who are vegetarians?
No, certainly not. They make fun of me today. So.
You're not, the next question, you are not blocking highways or gluing yourself to paintings in a museum, maybe privately, I don't know. Why don't you do that? Would you join an activist group like Extinction Rebellion, for example?
It's a good question. So, my mother recently joined Extinction Rebellion.
No way.
She's 67 and a special needs teacher, and yeah, she's really looking forward to be arrested next time.
Yeah.
So that obviously, that's also, by the way, how I turned vegan. It's like my mother called me and said, "Rutger, are you still vegetarian? Come on, I thought you were so idealistic and you have all these blah blah talks on stage and your old little mother is already..." That's usually, some people have like a devil here and an angel there, right? That gives them advice. I've got my mother here and my mother there. Anyway, maybe this is getting too personal. I honestly think it wouldn't be very effective for me to join those kind of protests. I think that every movement, there are many, many different roles to play. And to be honest, I think it would limit my effectiveness in many places if people would say, "Oh, that's you know, the radical Extinction Rebellion activist." But in many times I've said that I really appreciate what they're doing and that they're doing very important work.
Yeah. Also, I have a lot of tips and tricks for your mother to get quickly arrested. Okay. I do crime reports, so I will give her a call, okay?
Well,
so,
I'll put you two in touch. Yeah.
Last question from the readers of the Morgen. What's your view on individual responsibility? Is it effective to instill flight shame in people or convince them to become vegetarians or vegans?
I've always believed in the power of shame. There's nothing wrong with shame. I mean, we humans are pretty much the only animal in the animal kingdom with the ability to blush. There's a reason for that. I mean, it helps people to cooperate and sometimes do the right thing. So I've got no problem with shaming people. I quite love to do that sometimes. Especially, I love to shame, you know, leftist progressives who still aren't vegans. But in the end, it's all about what works. And quite often it doesn't really work. And then, yeah, you shouldn't obsess too much over those kind of tactics. And again, this goes back to the thing we talked about earlier is, yeah, we leftist progressives talk so much about what we shouldn't do, but the main question is, of course, what are we actually going to do?
Okay, Power of Shame, I hear a great love song. Thank you so much, Rutger Bregman, for the insights.